speaking of parasites and wastes of space who are destroying the country, both culturally and economically.
We're talking about the Conservatives again.
No, in fact, we're talking about those who should be, ideally, in an ideal world, the ideological villains and enemies of the Conservatives, but who the Conservatives and all the establishment have consistently bent over backwards to accommodate. That being protesters like Just Stop Oil, who have been at it again. Now, for the past, I don't even know how long at this point, for the past year, the UK has been constantly beset by a number of non-violent protests that have been going on from climate activists, both from Extinction Rebellion, Insulate Britain, and now Just Stop Oil, who are basically the same people again.
There's actually a collective noun for these people.
Oh, let's hear it.
Middle-class wankstains.
Yes, I agree. and we'll get into how just how accurate that is when we examine who these people are, because every single time it's true. So Just Stop Oil protesters yesterday glued themselves to a Turner painting at the Manchester Art Gallery. And the big one that was the most important one that people paid attention to, because this seems to have been a coordinated attack by a lot of them, because they love using glue to glue themselves to things, and I can only assume that's because if police try and pull them off and it rips the skin, then you can say you've been a victim of police brutality.
Good.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. Good. I don't think they go far enough.
Yeah, you deserve to
personally.
lose that layer of skin.
Yeah, and the big one that they did was that they glued themselves to the Last Supper, if we go to the next one, John, at the Royal Academy. Now, I think that this is a replica of the original, because the original's in Milan or something. This was a replica painted by Da Vinci's student, but still pretty culturally important, still a masterpiece, still something that we should show some respect to, and not allow these kinds of nutters to get anywhere near.
Honestly, if I was there, I'd find myself very difficult to restrain from conducting direct action against them.
As would I. And you can see them, that it's all very clear who these people are. They're all in Just Stop Oil shirts. And I've just put forward, I don't think loads of people are suggesting that the way to deal with these sorts of nutters is to say, just ignore them. Just let them rot. Just let them rot there. I don't think that's going to work, though, because they amp up all of their protests to where they're doing stuff like this. I don't think just ignoring them is going to do anything, when it will just encourage them to do more daring and outlandish things. We're lucky to
hang on. It would be really funny, though, if literally no one cared.
It would be.
They literally, do you not care that we're glued here? No.
No.
How long are you going to be there? Well, until you care. Oh, bye then.
Yeah, well, if the people sat on the bench staring at it, just ignore them and kept admiring the painting.
And just, come the end of the day, the gallery just shuts off the lights, closes the locks and doors. It's like, see you tomorrow.
Did anybody bring a packed lunch?
Exactly.
Nope.
Are you going to get to the toilet?
As funny as that would be,
I think that's what we should do.
I don't think it'll work, though, because honestly, I don't see these people being above, like, if nobody's paying attention, literally just getting a knife and starting to rip these paintings apart.
Let them do it. Let them do it. See how that goes.
I mean, yeah, it'll end badly for them, but I would rather they not destroy the painting first.
But
I've said that we should just be actively profiling these people, treat these galleries like any other business should, and be like, well, if we can tell that what you're going to do when you get in here is going to be damaging to what we're holding, no, you're just not allowed in here. You're barred for life. If you've got a Just Stop Oil shirt on, as soon as you get into a gallery, barred for
essentially
life.
Treat them like terrorists.
Yes, absolutely, because
cultural terrorists.
They are cultural terrorists on a certain, from a certain perspective. And the interesting thing that I'll get into is regarding there's so much criticism of the actual studies that they refer to when they're saying about how it's going to, if we don't do this within this amount of years, where the entire planet's going to set on fire and we're going to be dead and people will starve and other such things. And I've been looking into some of the climate change stuff recently and listening about it. And the IPCC, which is what a lot of these people refer to, the International Panel on Climate Change, their calculations is that basically this whole 1.5 degrees is impossible. There's no way that we can do it. Even if the Paris Climate Agreement was adhered to, we'd still be somewhere in the 2.5 degree zone, except even if we did everything that everybody agreed to in the climate change agreements with the Paris Agreement, the economic damage that would be caused by that to the world would actually be worse than any sort of environmental effects that could come as a result of it, because of course they're asking us to destroy the economy and destroy global supply chains, destroy all of this sort of stuff for the sake of these middle class wank stains feeling good about themselves and being able to tuck themselves in bed at night and say, I've done a good job.
They don't understand that their food is grown by oil. It's oil in the tractors that's growing your food.
Well, they would argue that we need to just find something else to put in the tractors because they're idiots. Well, I'll get
goodwill.
I'll get into some of their solutions. They also two very clearly overprivileged middle-class students came into the National Gallery and glued themselves to the Haywine, or however you're supposed to pronounce it. The Haywine, is it? I think. As you can see, I'll just play the clip because they say some stuff over the top of it as well.
Art is important. It should be held for future generations to see. But when there's no food, what use is art? When there's no water, what use is art? And when billions of people are in pain and suffering, what use then is art?
This is so weird.
My name is Evan. I'm 22, and I'm a supporter of Just Stop Oil, demanding an end to new licensing of oil and gas.
Didn't notice his name
I
before.
want to work in the arts, not disrupt them. But the situation we're in means that we have to do everything non-violently possible to prevent the civilizational collapse that we are hurtling towards. We've stuck a reimagined version of the Haywine that shows the destructive nature of our addiction to oil. I first saw this painting when I was at school. It's an important part of our cultural history, our heritage. But it's not more important than the 3.5 billion people already in danger because of the climate crisis.
Moral grandstanding on a ridiculous level to a gallery full of people who probably don't really care about anything they've got to say.
No, but also he's not talking about future generations. What future generations?
Yeah, I mean, these people probably aren't going to have kids, are
exactly.
they? I mean, if you want to know what the sort of people that are doing this, that are actively trying to make your life worse, because as we'll get into, these sorts of protests do sadly have an actual effect, and the effect is always negative on the common person. That guy's name that was flashed up on screen there was Eben Lazarus. What kind of... does he sound like a man from working class northern shires? No, he does not.
I was going to say, I don't think he was christened that. But then, if he was christened that, he's certainly not from the working class.
I don't know. Poshos have very strange names. There's a real truth in the meme of, like, it's Tarquin going off to his climate protests. And then there was this one that I found on...
Can I just point out, this guy looks a lot like Ted Kaczynski.
You know, he actually does.
He looks really similar, right?
Casper Hughes, question mark. Where's Uncle Ted nowadays?
He's in jail at the moment, dying of cancer, I'm afraid.
Ah, fair play. But he had something to say on this as well, to explain. This is one of the guys...
Ted Kaczynski would probably agree with them as well.
He probably would.
The industrial society and its consequences.
He would probably say, oh yeah, you're not going... Only gluing yourself to these paintings.
Non-violent.
This is chump change, son. What are you thinking?
You're not going to enact real change that way.
Well, sadly, Ted would be wrong, because these people, through their protests, have enacted some kind of real change, or at least influenced real change. So this guy is talking, one of the guys who glued himself to the Last Supper. Let's hear what he has to say about this as well.
My name is Casper Hughes. Today I'm going to glue myself to The Last Supper, a 15th century painting at the Royal Academy, along with 4 other people. This is non-violent direct action to try and get our government to stop issuing new fossil fuel licences immediately. I've got a 15-year-old son, and his future is looking increasingly hellish. He probably won't live to a ripe old age if we carry on as we are. And middle age onwards for him will be full of rape, famine, war, disease. It's going to be utterly hellish. The Chatham House report released last year said that there will be a 50% chance of simultaneous multiple breadbasket failures in the 40s. That means we could be facing a famine that could be measured in hundreds of millions or worse in 20 years' time.
typical sort of stuff we've come to expect from this massive doom-mongering. The future for my son will be full of rape.
But, well, yeah.
This is some strange fantasy land that you've concocted.
So we're gonna experience multiple famines, which may well happen. How is reducing our food production capacity by stopping oil going to help that? We use oil to make the food.
They're basically arguing that short-term famines now to avoid long-term famines in the future. And not just famines, but also just the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, everything else that the government has capitulated to, which has caused what we're doing right now. And I did look into the Chatham House report just to take a look through it quickly. And it's basically the kind of fear-mongering, doom-speak, death cultism that you would expect from this sort of thing. It uses language like, no region will be spared from the chaos, which doesn't really make me think that you are a neutral arbiter of scientific information when you're putting across this sort of thing. Yeah. And it says that, by the 2040s, the top 4 maize-producing countries have a 50% chance of synchronous crop failure, which is what will supposedly cause all of this disaster with famine and such. And now, for YouTube, I'm not going to deny the science, but I am going to squint my eyes and furrow my brow very hard at it, because we've had these kinds of predictions for decades.
Yes.
Just go back to Al Gore, we should all be underwater by now, and go back to the 1970s, we should all be encased in ice right now.
Yeah.
All sorts of things are supposed to have happened that didn't. So I'm not going to believe this sort of stuff. And I also actually contrasted this by looking at NASA's predictions of similar sorts of things. And what they were saying is that even if these effects on maize production do happen, because of changes in the climate, it would actually increase production elsewhere of wheat and other such things. Because shockingly enough, different produce is affected differently by changes in the climate. So we could make up for whatever breadbasket failures happen in other areas.
And also imagine if, the vast stretches of Russia and Canada become arable.
That would be incredible.
That's a lot of land that's currently under permafrost.
And I also took a look through Just Stop Oil's manifesto. And of course, what are they asking for to be able to hit these targets? Well, they're asking for increased government intervention. Of course they are. Because that's always worked every single time. I mean, just ask the USSR and the CCP how well government intervention works in food production. And they also say that the government, as a result of this increased government intervention, we need the government to be guided by citizens' assemblies, which is the exact same thing that Extinction Rebellion and Insulate Britain advocated for.
Which exactly the same thing the French revolutionaries were advocating for.
Exactly. And the thing is, isn't it very, very convenient that this obvious power grab that they're trying to advocate for here is just veiled with the veneer of respectability due to, I just care about the climate, bro. Yeah. I just care about the climate, bro. You don't want the planet to explode? You're going to have to put me in charge of the government, bro. It's the only way to do it. And they argue that the IPCC isn't fear-mongering enough. They say, you're far too conservative on this. What, you think the planet's going to explode by 2040? You need to bump that number up, mate. And
the planet exploded in 2009, like Al Gore told us.
And they also say that we need to halt all flights immediately. And they
let's hear them out.
Yeah, well,
imagine how little immigration would happen if we halted all flights immediately.
I mean, it would be easier to get rid of the boats, seeing as there would be the armada of boats crossing the channel at that point. And but that will be a little bit ironic when we look into one of the co-founders of Just Stop Oil. But they also point to lots of climate and economic disasters, which more often than not are caused by the protests being successful, leading to the cancellation of major energy products. And then they use those problems that they've caused as further evidence for why we need to cut down energy projects. And they call for more renewable electrics, despite them being powered by coal, which is, I think, worse for the atmosphere and greenhouse emissions than oil is.
If they were promoting nuclear power stations at the same time, maybe I'd be able to agree with them.
Perhaps, but they're not.
No.
Because, of course, these death cultists don't want to acknowledge that nuclear exists or is a good thing.
Yeah, I know. It's really weird, isn't it? Like, nuclear power is so obviously the correct way to generate electricity in the modern era. But Germany's like, so we're going to shut all that down and rely on Russia. It's like, what? Why?
Yeah. Well, not just rely on Russia. I mean, we've seen a lot of the effects of having to rely on foreign countries, but an article from Michael Schellenberger also referenced saying, as a result of all of this, foreign nations benefit from rising oil and gas prices. Saudi Aramco recently increased investment in exploration and production by $8 billion. So, of course, we are trying to benefit from the lack of investments by major players in the market, its CEO said. So we're just empowering the Saudis, which we want to be reliant on the Saudis, don't we? Very trustworthy people. And I thought I'd point over here to an article from John that came out back in January, talking about when science becomes faith. Because, of course, a lot of the studies that go into this with the Chatham House and other such thing are based on mainstream science. But it's important to remain skeptical of the mainstream science, because John points out in here that gatekeeping is an institutional part of science, because gatekeeping, as you discussed recently, can be a very good thing, but it can also be a bad thing when it's, for instance, gatekeeping the correct opinions on things. And he goes,
when it comes to something like science, you need to have the plurality of opinions.
Yeah, you need to have a certain amount of people who are going to go against the grain and try and prove you wrong, because that's the whole scientific method.
That is, read Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and that's how it's always been done. There's a dominant paradigm that marginalizes critics, and eventually the critics become so numerous and obviously right that it essentially overturns the existing paradigm, and then you get a new one that again silences its critics, and eventually they become so numerous and obviously right that it sweeps back and forward like this. Like, it's not like the rational process everyone wants to pretend that it is.
Well, of course not. I mean, John refers to the Structure of Scientific Revolutions in this article.
Oh, right. Okay. I haven't actually read this article.
And what it actually does as well is it conforms to the iron law of oligarchy as well, where the small cabal of people who end up being the trendsetters, the ones with the correct opinions, are the ones that everybody else has to conform to. Where he says science cultists end up orientating themselves around false beliefs with fanatical certainty, and it's then imperative that discourse be controlled to preserve those beliefs, exactly how you're talking about.
Yeah.
And a good example of this as well, to point to another article from us that came out recently that you're able to access if you've got a premium account, and if you go on, if you get a silver account or above, you'll be able to access the audio track, is Connor's recent article on the academic attack on English literature, where he refers to this kind of academic gatekeeping that you would see in science, where he talks about how he wrote an essay on Simone de Beauvoir's, as he refers to it, Tome of Tosh, The Second Sex, and how that was met by criticism by one pseudonymized assessor who said that he had threatened the ideas they had based their career on, and they couldn't take Connor seriously beyond the first paragraph. And if you wonder why all of if you wonder why
very interesting response.
Yeah, if you wonder why all of the climate science seems to conform to this one very strict doom mongering kind of framework, is probably because anything that gets put forward that distances itself from that probably gets that sort of response, sadly enough. So just a reminder to always stay skeptical. But interestingly, Daily Mail have done some expose journalism into the people behind Just Stop Oil, finding that some of them are community organisers, the sorts of people that you would expect.
Communists.
Communists, obviously. One of them who moaned that attending meetings to claim benefits was getting in the way of his activism. Because apparently the meetings where he gets benefits get in the way of his activism. When you think about that, that means that the government, by paying this man benefits in the first place, is subsidising his public disruptions.
This is one of the reasons I hate benefits.
Yes, absolutely. It's ridiculous. And the sorts of people involved in this, one of them, Miss Porter, was previously arrested for scaling a roof of Barclaycard's headquarters and dousing the building in paint and letting off flares during a disruptive protest in 2019. I mean, they want to claim themselves as non-violent, but the amount of actual damage that could be done to people if you got caught in something like that would be less than non-violent. But interestingly, if we go to the next one, they've done a look into the Just Stop Oil co-founder, Hannah Hunt, which I think is one of those two middle-class Wankstein teenagers,
right,
who were at the what's it called again? The Mayhane? That painting.
I can see the privilege dripping off them.
I know, but I'll just read a little bit about this because it goes to show the hypocrisy of the people organising these protests and the hypocrisy of their demands for the rest of the public. The whole climate responsibility for thee but not for me attitude. They say she glued herself to the priceless artwork, has been accused of being a jet-setting sailor who has racked up tens of thousands of air miles. Student Hannah Hunt, of course she's a student.
How does she get the money money for all of this?
I wonder where. Perhaps from Daddy.
I guess it must be.
Yes, she's 23, co-founder of Just
From
Stop
Brighton,
Oil.
is she?
Yeah, she is from
Oh,
Brighton.
what a shock.
Oh, and Rory just wanted to me to remind everybody that Brighton is possibly the worst place in the UK. It's full of these sorts of people. It's full of middle-class Tarquins and Hannah Hunts who will want to ruin your lives so they can feel better about themselves.
They can feel less guilty about all of the air miles they've racked up going on exotic holidays.
Yeah, must be it. She's the co-founder of Just Stop Oil. Social media pages are filled with exotic holiday pictures like the one on screen. I'm sure that this boat was powered by wind, maybe powered by solar panels. And she's got exotic holiday pictures from Bali, Australia, and the Canary Islands. You know, Australia's quite a ways away, so that's quite a long
Costs
flight.
a lot of money to go to Australia.
It really does. And they calculate if Miss Hunt flew to every destination, she would have clocked up 49,404 air miles. I think that's more than I've got in my entire life over 5 years, and has been responsible for the emissions of at least 13 tons of carbon dioxide. And the European average per person is 8.4 tons for a whole year, but that is taking into account driving and everything else that you'll be doing with your life, not purely from air miles.
It's one rule for the privileged, isn't it?
Yep. It's not known if the eco-activist chose to offset the carbon from her flights. Of course I doubt it. And her father runs an environmental consultancy firm, and her family purchased an early 20th century property on the west coast of Scotland that has one of the lowest possible energy efficiency ratings available.
But I just love this. Like, her dad's making bank out of being an environmental consultant. Amazing.
Of course, and she feels the need to get involved in the grift, I can only assume. But this is all just to point out that these people are not the representatives of the common people. These are the most privileged and insufferable in society who want to make an impact because they can't live up to Daddy's legacy and feel terribly guilty about accepting all of his money for these fancy holidays. And this is why no one cares when these people do this sort of thing beyond the obvious disruption in the day-to-day life. They care about the disruption. They don't care about the actual cause, because people care about the cost of living and the energy crisis. They don't care about the environment really when it comes down to it, because it's so nebulous.
Well, and these people are so inauthentic. Like, they're not people who are like struggling and who are genuinely concerned or anything like that. No, they're jet-setting, spoiled brats.
They're not even setting a good example. And
exactly.
To Just Stop Oil, I ask of you, why should we care when you so obviously don't? Not really.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the hangouts we do sometimes that are premium, with Gatekeeping Works, the last one we did between me and Carl on Warhammer 40,000, of course. And you're going to follow what else Carl's putting out, you can follow him on Getter at Carl Benjamin on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.